Let me start the meeting by asking Ms. Ostagin, our board president, to come up and open up the meeting. It's actually, we have a quorum for board, so we'll have to open it up as a board meeting. So, Ms. Ostagin.
Today is May 29, 2018. It is a Tuesday, and I'm opening up the community budget review, and there are 5 board members, Mrs. Flores, Mr. Monguia, Mr. Ibarra, and myself. Thank you. And Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mrs. King. And let me welcome everyone to our third and final budget review meeting out in the community. And we're going to walk through this, and at the end, if anyone has any questions, we will have an open mic for any kind of comment or questions concerning the meeting. We most likely will have other people walk in as we conduct this meeting. Let me go ahead and start. The first few slides I'm going to show you is our slides of newspaper coverage of school districts that are also struggling with their finances. We have Judson, we have Klein, Houston ISD, Northeast, Friendswood, Bushland ISD, Cy-Fair ISD, LaPorte ISD, San Antonio ISD, Floresville, just down the road from us, Austin ISD, McAllen ISD, and so forth. The reason I show you these slides is that, while this is a budget review, I'm going to present some real financial challenges the district is facing, but I wanted to let people also know that this district is not the only district facing these financial challenges. One of the reasons so many school districts all over the state are facing financial challenges is that the state legislature simply has not funded public education at the level that they need to be funded. As a matter of fact, they are funding at a level that is lower than what they were funding in 2008. But in addition to the state not funding the school district at the level they should, what compounds our problem, if you will look at this slide, is the decline in enrollment. Just 4.5 years ago, in 2013-14, the school district had a little over 10,000 students. The projection for next year is 8,600, a decline of about 1,400 students in about 5 years, or a 14% decline. So what happens when enrollment drops, so does the revenue. And if I can show you, just 2 years ago, the district operated at about 81 million, and projection for next year is that we'll operate at about 71 million, which is about a $10 million decline in revenue in really just two years. So whenever we have a decline in enrollment, and we lose the 500 students that were projected, it's based off of the projected enrollment, the projected enrollment that was 9369. So the actual loss from budget to budget is really 769. And the other thing this slide shows is that while we project 8,600 for next year, the following year we're also projecting another decline, which will be about 80 to 8,350, which is a decline, I believe, of about 250 students. So every time that we lose enrollment, for every student that we lose, the school district loses funding to the tune of about $7,600 a student, $7,605. And when you consider the drop of enrollment of about 1,400 times the $7,605 plus the additional new program costs, that results in a deficit of about $6.4 million is what we're looking at for next year. So one of the things that I think we need to do is, since enrollment has dropped 14%, in essence, the operation of this district has dropped by 14%. So we need to reduce the operating costs of our school district. And some of these reductions are coming from some of these cuts. 10 clerical positions, I believe the majority, nearly all of them, I believe, out of the central office. 10 professional administrative positions that also come from the central office. 8 maintenance custodial positions, 19 to 20 teacher positions that are being reduced through attrition. And when you consider that we have 500 fewer students to teach, clearly we need about 20 fewer teachers, and that's why we have that reduction. And then we have the reduction of 6 police officer positions. And someone might ask, with the activities being what they are in the last few years and more recently, last few weeks with school shootings, why would we be reducing police officers? I can tell you that the positions being reduced are not presently assigned to schools right now. To give you an idea, Southside High School has 4 officers assigned this year. They will have 4 officers assigned next year. Zamora Middle School and every middle school in this district has 2 officers assigned. They will have 2 officers assigned again next year. So the reduction is not a reduction in officers out of the schools. It's these officers are either involved in administration, in the management of the police department, or they're involved in the security of the buildings on an after-school basis. So on this previous slide, we talked about reducing 2.9 million. That's less than halfway toward that $6.4 million deficit. So then you might ask, where does the difference come from? Well, if no new revenue comes into the school system, the difference would come from the possibility of some of these reductions. All of these reductions are reductions that will actually impact students. These are programs that, in our opinion, are good for students, communities, and schools. Our after-school programs, clearly having competitive teacher salaries, employee salaries. If you want to keep good employees, you have to be able to pay them accordingly. And the list goes on. Right now, we staff our elementaries at 22 to 1, and the possibility that we may have to go to 24 to 1, and of course the upgrading of our facilities. Now, some would ask, is that the only way to make up the difference? And the answer is no. We could come up, there's a process for additional revenue so that the reductions would not have to get to this particular level. And so this slide, what it shows you is the south part of San Antonio, the school districts. And South San ISD is right here in the middle. This dark area here is actually our boundaries. And our maintenance and operation tax rate is $1.04. That's what we tax our homeowners, our property owners, for maintenance and operation, $1.04. Every school district around us, from Edgewood, San Antonio, Harlandale, Southside, Somerset, and Southwest, they tax their property owners at $1.17. And the law changed in 2008, I think it was school year 07-08. At that time, the state of Texas basically gave school boards the authority to set the tax rate for maintenance and operation up to $1.04. And school boards can set it beyond $1.04, but if they do, they need to have a public referendum for the voters to approve the tax rate above the $1.04. Well, in 2008, which was the second year to do this, actually Edgewood was the first district in the area to get to the $1.17, and I believe they did it the previous year. But Harlandale in 2008 set up their tax rate at $1.17, and since then, Harlandale has raised an additional $80 million to educate their children. And again, this was 10 years ago. If our district if South San had set the tax rate at $1.17 10 years ago, South San would have raised an additional $64 million in those 10 years that we did not raise because the tax rate was not set at that level. And so, it's a question of, after 10 years, is it time for South San, our community, to basically catch up with everybody else? And the other thing I'll tell you about this map, that every one of those communities, when they put the referendum out to their voters, every single one, those communities all approved that $1.17. We have not, quite frankly, not the community's fault, it's because we, the school district, have not put the referendum out there. Next week, on Wednesday, a week from tomorrow, I think it's June the 7th, 7th or 6th? Wednesday, 6th, thank you. I think it's June 6th. We have a school board meeting, and I intend to recommend to the school board that we set this tax rate at that $1.17. And if the board approves it, the board will also have to call for a referendum, an election, for the community to consider the question. And so it doesn't become final unless the community votes in the affirmative and gives the school district permission. And the board will decide when the election date will be, most likely July or August, but they will decide that next week sometime. So the question is, how does this impact our taxpayers? Well, if you are a homeowner that owns a home and pay property taxes through the home that you own, the $6.4 million that is raised by the additional tax rate, this 13-cent rate increase, it raises $6.4 million. The homeowners really pay 12.5%. All right, that 12.5% of that is $800,000. The remaining $5.6 million is provided by the state of Texas and the business property owners that own businesses inside the tax base for South San. To give you an example, if someone gave me $1.25 right now and I return $10 to you, that's what the comparison is. So we're asking homeowners, parents, for every $1.25 you invest in the education of your children, these folks will provide the additional $8.75 for a total of $10 investment in the education of children. And so what this chart shows is that the cash flow. At one of these previous meetings, some of the community members asked about, if we approve this, you're not going to have the money available for this next year. And the question is, yes, we do have it available. And this is a chart that shows the flow of the money that comes to the district on an ongoing basis, on a month-by-month basis. So clearly, this is the expenditure line. This is how much we're spending on average monthly, and this is the revenue coming in. So you can tell by the first half of the year, we way exceed what the expenditures are. These monies are put away, saved in essence, so that when this revenue goes below the expenditure line, we basically have those dollars available to spend and to run the school system. So the question now is, how does this impact taxpayers on an individual basis? If your home is valued at $25,000 in value, there is no tax rate increase. But if your home value is $50,000, it's $2.71 per month. If your home is valued at $75,000 in value, then your monthly increase in taxes is $5.42. And if your home is valued at $100,000 within our tax base here at South San, then your increase is $8.13. An increase for sure. There's a tax rate increase clearly. But what we try to demonstrate by these pictures is this is about what this would cost you, the value meal or a ticket to the movies once a month. I mean, that's really what the investment is. And if you happen to be renters, clearly the rent is dependent on the landlord. But when you consider that the taxes for the landlord do not exceed these levels, if they pass on the increase to the renters, this is approximately what I would estimate they would pass on as far as increased rent. And if you happen to be Section 8, if you rent a Section 8 property, an increase in taxes should not impact the rent at all, because on Section 8, the increase in taxes really is based on the income of the family that rents that house. And we just talked about that. And if you happen to be 65 and over, then your school district taxes are frozen. So anyone that is 65 and older, senior citizens, their taxes basically are frozen. Whether this referendum succeeds or doesn't succeed, their taxes for the school district remain the same. So with that, let me stop talking. And I know there's a lot of staff in the audience. They may not have questions, but our community may have questions. I'll be happy to respond to questions. Here's a mic up here. We'll limit the questions and comments to 3 minutes each, and we'll be happy to respond to them. Anybody, welcome to come to the mic and ask a question.
evening, Dr. Saavedra.
Good evening.
On one of the slides, you showed the positions, and you said that our officers in those positions aren't the ones out on the field. Can you clarify to us what positions those are, if they're not out in the field?
You talking about these 6 here?
Yes.
Yeah, these are officers that provide security or patrol of the campuses outside of school hours.
So they're not there during school hours, like it won't be our people who are answering the radio, anybody that's in the office at the time that communicates with the officers, it won't be any of those officers?
It's not any officer that is presently assigned to schools.
To a campus.
To a
So what
campus.
happens if we have an officer call in or two? You know, there's seasons where we have people get really sick and we don't have that coverage. And I know you said in the previous meeting, not the last one, but the one before, that we were the only district who had the amount of officers, student per officer ratio.
Right.
And we had a big, you know, a good,
Right.
I'd like to commend that because of what we have, we don't have the problems that other districts have. And in fact, I do think we can use more, but because of what we have now, we're much safer than other districts. My second question is on the 10 professional admin positions. What positions are those?
I don't have the list with me, but I can tell you there's an executive director position is one. I believe there's coordinator positions, some director positions. There's different positions. And the reason I don't publicly state specifically the positions is those individuals have not been talked to.
Talk to you. Okay, I respect that. Also, you compared us to Harlandale in 2008 and how they passed their tax ratification election. But I'd like to say that Harlandale in 2008 wasn't in the position that South San was in 2008. And in fact, we've been financially irresponsible as a district. And I think that's a lot of why that couldn't go through. So that's just something I'd like you to know. They also didn't close schools. And I think that had a big difference in why they gained so much money. Last question for now, because they gave me my time limit. You said that you were going to call the board meeting for the tax ratification election. I know that it was put in the San Antonio Express News on Sunday, so for me, just like the last meeting that I asked that, he said y'all have a date in mind. Can we please have that date?
I don't have a date in mind.
So if I call the Bexar County
it is-
Elections Office, they'll tell me there's no date?
First of all, the date doesn't get set by the administration, it gets set by the school board.
But if I call, there's no set date?
I have no idea what.
If I call the elections
I don't know
office,
what they're
I
gonna
can
give you, but I can tell you the date is not set until the board votes on it.
Okay, and another question, out of all the programs that you showed, what would the cost be without the special programs that we're putting in now? In other words, the programs that we're putting in, we don't have the money for right now. So jumping into next school year, using those programs, if this TRE doesn't pass, can I finish, sir? I mean, thank you. If it doesn't pass, then we're going to be moving into a bigger deficit because we don't have that money. Are we going to be able to continue to function outside that when we're in a deficit now?
The deficit is 6.4 million presently without a TRE. So if the TRE fails, we will have a $6.4 million deficit, including the starting of those programs that you're talking about.
So without those programs, what would it be?
The deficit would be minus 1.6 billion, minus 1.6.
Okay, I'll wait another round.
Thank you. Somebody else? Yes, sir.
Good evening, Dr. Saavedra.
Good evening.
Once again, I just need to piggyback some of the comments that Stacy made, and I have more comments really than I do, and I do have a final question. First of all, I do understand, and my concern really is, in lieu of everything that's happened, again, once again, I'm here to defend any type of cuts, any type of employment cuts, especially our police department, because I understand that even with student enrollment dropping, living and growing up in this community, in this district, criminal activity has not stopped, student conduct and incidents have not slowed down, and the crime surrounding our campuses has not slowed down as well. I do understand that we're talking about cutting administrators, but I believe that police administrators, dispatchers, patrol officers, they're the foundation of our police department, and I'm very, very concerned about that because we knew of everything that has gone on that you did touch about with the niggas in Santa Fe. My concern is the safety of not just all the students, but, teachers and administrators in our district as well. So my question really is, are these cuts already set in stone? Is this something that we've already made a decision that we're going to cut these employees, these police officers, these administrators? Because once again, I helped Charles Buck run $1 billion industry, and I cringe when I use the word business when it comes to children, but that's what we're doing. We're trying to run a business because the district is a business. And sometimes we've got to tighten our belts, and we've got budgets as well where I work. But before we make any types of cuts, that is our last resort. We've got to go back and we've got to learn how to improve productivity processes, logistics, expanding and merchandising. We need to continue to develop these processes before we turn around and use cuts and affect people's well-being before we go. So my question is this in stone already that we're going to make these cuts?
Let me ask you a question.
Yes, sir.
These particular reductions or similar reductions will occur whether TRE passes or doesn't pass, because we have shrunk in operation 14%, and we need to reduce the cost of operating this district by about 14%.
Just one final statement that I'd like to make. Like I said, once again, we're in the midst of school safety in our country, and CNN just recently ran a report that there's been 22 school shootings since January the 1st of this year. And once again, I'm going to continue to be the voice for our police force here in the district, and I'd really like to see that change.
Anybody else? Any other comments? Okay, I'm going to dismiss the meeting. I will stay here. If you have questions or more feedback for the superintendent, I will stay here. That's the way we did the last meeting, and I'll receive the feedback. So thank you very much for coming in. Thank you.
It's a second time.